Are you ready to perform at your highest potential? Thank you for joining this GP Strategies webinar, where we'll explore best practices and innovative insights to help you and your organization improve performance.
So again, I want to thank you all for joining our session today, and I'm really excited to introduce you to our presenter. Scott Barber has over 24 years of experience designing, delivering, and evaluating enterprise digital adoption learning solutions for a range of Fortune 500 companies and government agencies. He has Scrum Master certifications from both Scaled Agile and the Agile Alliance, and multiple years of experience in adopting the rituals and artifacts from Scrum to run successful enterprise software learning projects. And recently at TICE 2024, he received the award for Training Industry's top read articles for his piece on a lean learning approach for your next digital transformation. We really have a great session for you today. And with that, I do want to hand it off to Scott.
Hey, Kim, thank you very much. Thank you for that very generous introduction. I certainly appreciate that. My name is Scott Barber. I live in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm the Director of Agile Learning, and we're going to go ahead and get started with the presentation. So that is me. There we go. So let's just move on. What we're going to talk about in this session, though, is lean learning and the lean learning experience. Certainly not all of the components of it. This is a 45-minute session. But what this session is designed to do is to talk to you about the critical curriculum build process that we go through as lean learning, and to give you some examples of how we've used this process in the past and some of the results that we've gotten also. But at the same time, there's a lot of detail, and we'll go into that detail, and we'll also pause from time to time to see what questions you have. So what we're going to talk about in this webinar is how many, if not most, learning teams approach an ERP or a digital adoption analysis, how this can result a lot of times in an over-engineered learning solution, which actually in some cases can do more harm than good for a digital adoption. And then we're going to introduce concepts from Lean. Since we're the lean learning team, we're going to talk about the difference between push and pull, and how we as a learning team can look at those concepts, which are really from manufacturing, and see how we can apply them to become more efficient and effective as a learning team. And then specifically, we're going to talk about how a lean learning team approaches an analysis. What do we look at? What is the information that we're trying to gather? How do we gather it? How do we document it? And then how do we build a curriculum from that? And then finally, what does that curriculum look like? Now, when we talk about ERP, I think as an instructional developer, right, a professional instructional developer, one of the things that we forget about at times is that when we're going through a digital adoption, we're having to deal with scale. So in ERP and digital adoptions, so the learning team has to get their biggest bang for their buck at scale. So if you look at a standard approach where you're doing a lot of detailed individual analysis, losses and instructional development in the weeds, and you forget about the big picture. And the big picture that we're talking about in this context, by the way, is business performance. So we'll talk about business performance a lot, but let's not miss that the point of a digital adoption or of an ERP implementation such as SAP is not to keep me and people like me employed, of course. It's to build a more efficient business. It's to become better, more productive, more efficient, to make more money, to have higher profitability, to hit all of our KPIs and goals. That is the point of an ERP. So we'll talk about the learning solution in the context of that big picture also. So a lot of times a standard and comprehensive approach, and this is an approach that I've used and I've even used successfully many times in the past, but we use what is called a job task analysis to figure out what the curriculum should be for an ERP analysis. And usually we start with a business process master list, which is a list of potentially hundreds of transactions that are going to be performed in the new system. And each transaction, we go in and examine it. And you can see an example here on the screen from a business process master list. So we take a look at each of these transactions and we examine them to see how frequently they're used, What are the consequences of error if somebody makes a mistake? How complex are they to perform? And what is the degree of change from the previous system? And we assign a score to each of these transactions. And based on the scores, higher scores transactions are more relevant for training. And then we create a role-based curriculum around that. So overall, the general approach, the standard approach, if you will, is to base our curriculum on the functions of the system and of the roles performing that system, which sounds like a very logical and is a very logical approach. However, this can lead to challenges sometimes, and you see this represented with the huge pile of paperwork over on the right-hand side. A lot of times these solutions can be difficult to build. If we're talking about, let's say, for example, an SAP implementation, an SAP implementation takes a period of time from the analysis of the software to the implementation of the software. And during that period of time, the system is being tested, configured, and changed all during that period of time when you get closer and closer to a go live. The training team finds themselves having a compressed time schedule because we don't exactly know what the final functionality of the system is going to be like. So we lose time on the front end. And on the back end, we have a go live and we have to have people ready for that. So these kind of larger job task analysis learning solutions can be difficult to build for a learning team just because of this time compression. We have to deliver these solutions in short in a short time period. And they often times reflect a kind of more is better philosophy. So if we have a job task analysis and we have and we've taken a look at the technical requirements of the software application, a lot of times, and we base our curriculum around that, a lot of times we end up with, as represented here, a lot more training than we really need. Because what we find ourselves doing is, well, we need to create training for that because it is possible for a person to do that. What we end up doing at the end of this is overwhelming users with training, and they end up being actually a little less efficient than they should be after the go live. The other big challenge with this larger kind of standard solution is when we create a lot of system documentation, that system documentation has a tendency to become obsolete quickly. I was just at the conference a few months ago and talking about obsolescence of learning materials, and depending on who you talk to, you get a different opinion. Some people say normal learning materials become obsolete after a couple of years. Another opinion I got was that no, it's actually much quicker than that now. It's about 6 months to a year before those learning materials become obsolete. Here in ERP, though, those materials can become obsolete even more quickly because typically after a go live, the system is still not going to be 100%. Changes will be made to the system and to business processes to accommodate that. And the resulting materials that were created before go live, before all of this happened, have to be changed. So a couple of general issues that we see typically with these kind of larger comprehensive solutions. But if you look at this from a lean perspective, and lean, by the way, is a manufacturing philosophy that looks at the elimination of waste in the manufacturing process. And when we, as a lean learning team, started to look at some of these lean principles, we found that some of these things apply, particularly the concept of push versus pull is a very important lean concept. And we felt it was an important concept for us to explore too and to think about. Because what we find in a push solution is commonly defined as a top-down solution that is then flowed down to the bottom parts of an organization. In this kind of push solution, where we as leadership, as a project team, as people who are directly involved necessarily in the day-to-day task of the business, we have a tendency to come up with these larger solutions, and the supply would exceed demand. We create more training in our case than is needed. Information does have a tendency to flow from the top down. You know, me as let's say I'm the leader of an organization, it's what I think the training should be, which may not necessarily be what the end users actually need. As a matter of fact, this brings up an interesting story of a recent experience of one of our LLX consultants who was involved in a very recent training program, and he was taking people through the training program. And it's funny because this was kind of a top-down solution. When he was actually delivering the training to the end users, and this was for scan gun training, every one of the trainees said, "Look, this is too much. All we need to know is very simply, how do we use, in this case of the scan gun training, how do we use these scan guns in our job? We don't need the big show. Just show us what we need to do in our job and everything will be fine. So we actually saw a living example of this in the last few weeks as an LLX team. And this push solution leads to overproduction. It can lead to over-engineering. It can lead to the learning team being less responsive to real changes in demand from the learners, and it can lead to longer lead times also. So if we look, though, at the LLX analysis approach, as opposed to looking at the system and being focused on the system, we're going to focus on business capability, and we're going to value that over training. And when we look at requirements in an analysis for digital adoption, we really want to do two things. We want to do value stream mapping, which means we want to have a very good view of how value is created from within the business. And in addition to that, we want to take a detailed look at the learner personas. We want to know those roles for which the solution is going to be applied in great detail. And we find that if we know those two things, how value is created in the business and who is creating that value in the business, we can come up with a much better curriculum. And this curriculum is not going to be based, sorry, I clicked too soon there. This curriculum is not going to be based on necessarily the new system and the system functionality, but rather it's going to be what new or revised capabilities is the new system going to give us to allow us to become a better business. Now, in order for us to do this, right, the LLX team, we have the same business goal as the digital project adoption team, running a better business after adoption. For us to do a more effective job at this, we have found that if we go to a pull solution, again, this is a lean concept, we end up with a much more efficient learning solution. We'll take a look at how this works in a second. But conceptually, the LX team, we want to base this on the specific needs of the learner, not the estimated needs of the learner. We don't want to guess. We want to be direct about it. So we want to build the capability for frontline users of the system based on what they need the most, not what we think they need the most, if that makes sense. So key to this concept, though, is something from Agile, and the Lean Learning team makes extensive use of Agile as well as Lean. But a concept here that is very important is the concept of a minimal viable product. And what minimal viable product means is we're only going to create enough of a solution to satisfy a requirement and no more. And in order for us to do that effectively, we have to have a detailed view of the requirements. So what this means is, overall, if we're going to be more responsive to the needs of our learners in digital adoptions, we need to know more about what they need. So we're going to have to do a much more detailed analysis. So let's talk about the way the Lean Learning team approaches this. First off, organizationally, we think about curriculum and curriculum requirements in terms of a value stream. A value stream is a bundle of business functionality that is directly related to achieving a business purpose. For example, warehouse outbound would be a great example of that. So if we have a warehouse, and typically a warehouse does three different things, right? They bring products into the warehouse, they store them in a regimented way so they can be found easily, and then they pick and ship those products after the customer orders them. So what we're talking about is the warehouse outbound, where we're going to pick and ship the products for a customer. So that would be our value stream that we're using as an example. So when we're creating our value stream map, we want to do a few things in our analysis. First, we want to have an understanding of what the purpose of that particular value stream is. So what are they doing? What are they trying to achieve? What, in this case, warehouse outbound, fairly easy to derive what the meaning of that is. Some of the purpose may not be quite so easy. Finance, what is the purpose of finance, for example? We need to figure out what the purpose of each of those individual value streams is so we can define that, and more importantly, so we can gather the KPIs and metrics that are used to judge the performance of that individual value stream, so we know what the standards are. We also need to know what the major movements are from within the business process. And then finally, what are the critical capabilities, and we'll talk about capabilities here in a second, that the value stream must have in order to be successful. So we want to know what key capabilities drive the value stream. What are the performance standards by which that value stream is considered to be successful as part of our analysis process? So let's just make sure we know where we are. So we're doing an analysis. We're going in. We're looking at a value stream. In this case, warehouse outbound. We want to know what capabilities that warehouse outbound value stream needs to have in order to be successful. And we need to know and we have an example here of the KPIs do they use in order to measure their success. In addition to that, we want to define this requirement, and we call this an epic. Our highest level requirement is an epic in a common sense textual format that we call a user story. And you can see an example of a user story on the right. So as a fulfillment center, right, collectively, we need to pick, pack, and ship our products so our customers can receive their orders on time as promised. So here we've established our top level requirement in English. We know what our quality standard is through our KPIs, and we know what the capabilities are, which we would take a look at here. So for example, if we wanted to take a look at a capability of warehouse assignment picking. Now, in our definition, we see that we need to pick, pack, and ship those products in order to be successful in this value stream. So this one capability, very important for us, warehouse assignment picking, and this is the ability as a warehouse outbound worker, I need to demonstrate how to perform a warehouse assignment picking so I can have products required for a custom order ready to ship quickly. So here I've defined my requirement. I have my capability, and my capability, once again, I've defined my KPI as being order picking accuracy of 100%, order fulfillment cycle time of 20 minutes, and I'm going to gather this as a part of the process also. So now I would like to point out that when we're creating this value stream map, and a value stream map would be a visual of all of the business processes along with the individual metrics. The value stream map could change throughout the life of the project. And how we're going to deliver these business capabilities can change as roles and business process could change throughout the project. So the real advantage that we have here with expressing things in this way and with gathering requirements in this way is that we can be just very clear on what those requirements are by using plain English. And if there are any changes, we can be very clear about what those changes are, both in our text and in our value stream map. For example, after implementing a new ERP system, and again, the assumption here is, sorry, I need to back up just a second. And the reason that we're gathering this information is that we're making a basic assumption in that how the business creates value after the ERP implementation, after the digital adoption, will be very, very similar to how they created it before. So, for example, if an automotive manufacturing company is making cars, after an ERP implementation, they're still going to make cars. They just want to do that better and more accurately. And so what we're talking about here is how do we gather up all of these detailed requirements in the capability requirements? And then finally, we get to the lowest level. So just to go back, we have our epics. So we know what the value stream is trying to achieve. We know what their KPIs are. We look at the individual capabilities and examine those in detail along with the quality standards. And then we as a learning team, we need to decide how we're going to train these capabilities in the future based on these requirements. So as we get down to the bottom level, we start to think as a learning team. So we know we have to build those capabilities, and we're going to start to think about how we're going to do that. And we typically do this through what's called using the user story format. And we can see the user story format here. So we document these requirements, epics, capabilities, and we're Agile standard user story format to do this. And we find this format to be extraordinarily useful as the requirements are written in plain English. We, though, as a learning team, have found over time, though, that we do need to make some modifications on a user story. So let's start back with a text user story and how a software development team would use that. User stories come out of Agile. They're used to establish requirements, and they have a certain format. And a user story format is typically this. As a persona, I need to perform an action that results in this benefit. So if we look at our previous example, as a warehouse outbound worker, I need to demonstrate how to perform warehouse assignment picking so I can have products required for a customer order ready to ship quickly. We can see we followed this format. So as a role, I need to perform an action that results in this benefit. Now, what we have found is that we need to modify, as a learning team, we need to modify these user stories and specifically take a look at the perform an action part of this, and instead use Bloom's taxonomy. If you're familiar with that, Bloom's taxonomy provides a regimented way for us to define the level of sophistication required of a learning element. So we take and apply these to come up with our user stories. So here's what this allows us to do. So if I say that my capability that I'm trying to build is warehouse assignment picking, and I say as a warehouse outbound worker, I need to demonstrate how to perform warehouse assignment picking so I can have products required for a customer order ready to ship quickly, then I, as a learning team, need to decide what learning objects am I going to create in order to build that capability or reinforce that capability in the future. So in our example, if we're talking about warehouse assignment picking, and if I want to create learning that would help the user fulfill this user story, then what learning materials do I need to create in order to support that? So I may create a task overview, which would be a conceptual unit that would explain what the task is. I may create a task demonstration, which would be a learning element, which would be a software simulation of how to do this warehouse assignment picking. There may be a simulation, so I, as a warehouse worker, can go through and practice it using a scan gun or perhaps another methodology. And there may be a task evaluation where me as a supervisor or a leader, as a training professional, I actually want to evaluate the performance of that individual worker. So I can see here from this one capability, right? Warehouse assignment picking. And from this one user story, as a warehouse outbound worker, I need to demonstrate how to perform a warehouse assignment picking so I can have the products required for a customer order ready to ship quickly. So if I have this requirement as a learning professional, what deliverables do I need to create in order to build that capability in the future? And we also, though, not only want to talk about those requirements, we also want to talk about the performance standards for that individual task. So we find that user acceptance criteria, which are standard in Agile, and they refer to the performance standards for an object. So in software development, acceptance criteria typically refer to the performance standards of a software feature, such as a shopping cart. In LLX, though, acceptance criteria are the performance standards that we want to measure the users by to know that if we were successful in building that capability. For example, the KPIs that you see here above, the order picking accuracy at 100% and the order fulfillment cycle time at 20 minutes, they could become the acceptance criteria for our business capability. So after we apply the training, we can then test to see if the learning solution is viable. If it is, if the roles taking the learning solution build the capability that we expect to the desired performance standard, then the solution is done. Remember, I talked about minimal viable product earlier. You have to test to know if your product is viable. And so that's what we do here through these standards. So it's the method by which we, and this is really the key method by which Lean is achieved. So we take care of the must-haves first, as defined by the value stream map, and then we train to that. We then test to determine that if we have the minimally viable product, and if so, we're then done with that part of the solution and can move on to other parts of the solution. So the learning solution can become quite complex, particularly for a large organization. If you have hundreds of individual learning objects, all in various states of development. And this whole solution can become quite complicated across time, as you can see, because we break this down in a very modular way. So this is where the Agile piece also comes in very handy for us also, an Agile PM tool like Jira, Azure DevOps, something of that nature. So even though the LX team, we followed this MVP, the minimal viable product philosophy, a learning solution still contains hundreds of learning objects, all in various states of build, test, and deploy. So we have a tendency to use a real-time Agile project management system, such as Azure DevOps, it's also known as ADO, or Jira. We find this to be fairly essential. So not only the team, but all of the affected stakeholders can plan and track their work and see what our various efforts are in real time. So in LLX, so we organize our curriculum by epics, capabilities, and stories, as you can see here on the screen. And we reflect the learning team goals, right? The business is trying to build capability in these areas, and we as the learning team are also trying to build capabilities in these areas. And just to give you a good example of why this is important, we have found over time when the project team knows that their goal is to build an efficient and effective group of end users to drive the digital adoption forward, and the more closely the training team aligns ourselves with the business objectives and talks about the learning solution in terms of business objectives, typically a lot better those relationships are with the subject matter experts, because they know that we're on the same page with them, and we're all after the same thing, right? We're not here just to train people. We're here to help make them a better business. And so we've talked a lot about so far in the session, a lot of details. This has been about 29 minutes of me just going at it full bore. So hopefully you've got something out of that, and we'll take a few minutes here at the end. But what I really wanted to drive to was this. So we talked about a little bit about how some of our philosophies in LLX are different, how we favor pull learning solutions over push learning solutions, how we favor minimal viable product over large comprehensive learning solutions. But one of the big differences really in LLX and how we approach this is not only in the analysis, but also how we manage things across the life of the project. So I wanted to take just a couple of minutes to talk about this here at the end. So we do not follow the ADDIE methodology that normal digital adoptions follow. Instead, we have come up with a stage gate two-step process, essentially, that we follow, two major phases. The first phase is the initiate phase. And it's the initiate phase where all of this analysis takes place. And if you think about creating a value stream map for a large organization is a pretty big undertaking. Most of the time, the lean learning team, right, this work is already taking place in most instances by the project team, because they're going in and performing a detailed business analysis. So a lot of times we're able to leverage off of, let's say it is SAP using the Activate methodology, and they're doing workshop A's and workshop B's, where they're coming up with their own value stream maps. We're able to leverage those value stream maps and turn them into our own value stream maps. So this initiation phase that we're talking about, there are a lot of different things that happen in addition to that analysis. There's the project team setup. There's coming up with a release schedule, and we'll talk about what the release schedule is in just a second. There's coming up with the iteration schedule, the pace by which the team is going to produce materials across the life of the project. They're building things such as learner personas. We didn't talk about learner personas directly, but learner personas are extraordinarily critical to this entire process, along with the value stream map, so we can match up who needs to do what and come up with a more effective curriculum. Then we want to create what is called the backlog. The backlog is all of the epics, the capabilities, and the learning objects that we're going to create to build those epics and capabilities. And then finally, from there, we're going to determine what our exact release plan is going to be. And the release plan is this. In LLX, we typically don't have a big bang kind of training event, or only a big bang training event. Certainly, there's a lot of training that happens prior to go live, but we have a tendency in the execute phase to release a little bit differently. So we're not necessarily trying to drive to the go live. We're trying to drive to the capability. So what we'll do is we'll take our product backlog, our big list of requirements, and all of the learning deliverables that we're planning on creating. Based on the priority that is set in combination with the business, we have to work with the business every day to see where their priorities are. We will come up with an iteration backlog. And in this iteration backlog, these are the deliverables that we have decided that are the most high priority for us right now. So these are the learning deliverables we're going to create. And we go through our develop, test, and revise process to come up with a testable learning solution. and it could be an individual learning object. It could be a bundle of learning objects that make up a single capability. It could be a requirement that has been developed, let's say, for example, for early adopters. Once we put the bundle of deliverables through this testing phase, we want to introduce them into different releases. And this is another big difference, I believe, between the way that we at the LLX team kind of approach some of these and some of the big bang philosophies. We love the concept of an early release where we're able to create early, even sometimes draft versions of learning materials and release those to early adopters for things such as user acceptance testing or our own internal user acceptance testing. But also to assist the implementation team with training up their testers. That does a couple of different things for us. One, it benefits the project team because they have more knowledgeable testers about the system because they've been able to see early versions of the learning product. It also benefits the learning team because we, of course, get that early feedback, which we need in order to become more efficient and effective. So you can see here in the execute phase, we have this develop, test, revise phase. We want to make sure that our learning products are robust before they go into the releases because feedback is just extraordinarily important to us because we know, right, and it's a critical element of the minimal viable product concept that you have to test to know if a particular learning deliverable is viable. So we have feedback throughout the life of the execute phase also, where we test to make sure not only that people learn what we expected them to learn, but we also want to do behavioral testing, sometimes called Kirkpatrick level 3 testing, where we actually do observation on the jobs to see if people are applying the learning as expected, and if not, coming up with a hypercare solution to help diagnose and fix those performance issues. But another very important feedback loop for us also is Kirkpatrick level 4. Is the business performing long term as well as we expected? Businesses set goals. If we're not meeting those goals, then perhaps we need to go in and do a Kirkpatrick level 4 assessment. Make sure that the business is performing where we expect it to, and if not, design an intervention around that. So we don't really see LLX as this big bang one-time solution. We see LLX as something we're involved very early in the process with a detailed analysis. We go through and we create the minimal viable product, and then we continue to test that product to make sure the business and individuals are performing long-term to really get the most benefit out of an ERP implementation. So with that, I am going to leave you with a couple of things that I would like for you to try. If you really want to get into Agile, if you really want to get into Lean, one of the biggest things that you can do is examine your assumptions. And this is a powerful tool that we use as an LLX team, not assuming that we know the best thing to do, but rather examining things from all sides and making sure and testing that we're taking the most efficient path. The LLX team, we're an Agile team, we're a Lean team, we believe in continuous improvement. And the only way to do that really is to examine what you're doing and make sure that it's working well. And this in turn helps you to develop an Agile mindset, right? Agile mindset is a very humble place to be because you come to the realization that you don't know everything and that you need help and that it takes a lot of feedback and help in order to come up with the best product possible. So the Agile mindset, a humbling process, but absolutely very necessary as a part of this also. But finally, and very importantly, is to learn by doing, by actually trying some of this stuff out, by going out and trying and embracing the Agile concept of failure, right? We don't mind failing in Agile because we always learn something from it, but learn by doing. One of the great analogies that I like to use and what we do in LLX to kind of contrast some of the standard approach with what we do in LLX is, to me, it's the difference between creating the manual. Let's say we're going to teach somebody to drive a car and we're going to create the documentation around that. So there are two different ways. I can create the manual, right? I can come up with all of the detailed documentation for this, or I could have actually somebody do it and observe it and actually drive. We believe that if you really want to learn something, the best way to do that is to learn by doing. A good example of that is when I taught my daughters to drive. Actually, my wife did that for the most part. I just had a very few things that I was in charge of. But one of those was learning how to change tires. We thought that was very important for them to learn. So what we didn't do is send them to the reference in the manual and have them read that. Instead, what I did is we went out into the street and we actually changed some tires, and I saw that they could do it. So learning by doing is the best way to do that. So that not only applies for your end users in the ERP adoption, that applies for us too as instructional design professionals, right? We're not going to be great at this at first, so keep doing it and you will get better at it. And with that, Kim, I think I'm going to turn it back over to you for Q&A.
Thanks, Scott. There's a lot of good, valuable information in a short time. So good job.
A lot of information. So thank you for your patience and your questions if you have them.
Yeah, so we have a few questions coming in, and while we're going through those, if anybody has to add some additional ones, you can add them to the chat feature and answer them time permitting. So anyway, there is a question here that says, you've talked about a job task analysis. Do you ever find value in doing those?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we didn't talk a huge amount about instructional design methodology in this, but there are really two different audiences that you have to concern yourself with in an ERP adoption. One of those is knowledge workers. Knowledge workers, those are, your white collar workers, people that have a tendency to work in an office. For those type of people, the capability mapping is a much more effective solution. However, if you do have manual laborers, such as in a warehouse or doing manual tasks, a lot of times it is a good idea to go in and do a job task analysis for that, because and I'm going to talk instructional design theory here, and I apologize ahead of time. Andragogical, right? An adult learning methodology is a lot of times much better for adult workers, where a pedagogical approach, right? Kind of a more of a rote approach is better for warehouse workers. So a lot of times in that kind of manual labor situation, you do still should perform a job task analysis just to make sure you're not missing any detail. But two different kinds of workers, really.
Good. You mentioned learner persona. Someone wants to know, what is it?
Yeah, a learner persona is interesting. So a learner persona, and this is a concept that comes out of Agile too, but you see it increasingly in more common use in learning solutions. And it's basically, I have an individual in a role. I don't want to just know that it's Joe Bob, the financial analyst, right? I want to know more about Joe Bob. What's Joe Bob's average level of education? How does Joe Bob prefer to learn? What is Joe Bob's learning situation like, right? Is he working in an office? Is he working at home? Is he in an office somewhere? We want to know kind of on average, what does that role look like in a lot more detail than just it's Joe Bob, the financial analyst. We want to know who Joe Bob is. So when we're creating the learning solution, we develop a lot of empathy for Joe Bob, right? And the situation that he or she is facing in trying to learn what we're trying to teach them. So
I like the fact that it's just not Joe, it's Joe Bob. So
Joe Bob. Yeah, well, I'm from Georgia, so Joe Bob. Or whatever. Yeah.
We have time for one more question. Okay, what examples do you have of early adopters using learning materials for a digital adoption?
Yeah, well, that's actually a great example. So we had a recent client that went live last year, and normally in one of these ERP implementations, the training team is just very, very oriented and having all the materials ready for the pre-go live training window. And any other kind of audience needs are kind of, put to the side because we're all focused on what the end users want, and that's it. And again, the challenge with that is a lot of these solutions are so big, right? There's not a whole lot of room for error in there. So you don't want to, you don't have time for early adopters because you're focused on that big bang solution. But what we found though is if we're getting these materials ready early, as we had for this client, they were able to go through and put some of their change team was able to get an early look at the training and provide us feedback on it. They had a range of people who had never seen the ERP program before and who had the responsibility to be user acceptance testers. So we had a lot of, first off, we had the value stream maps. The value stream maps are extraordinarily useful for having conversations with subject matter experts or also with end users. I mean, really, the value stream maps become the initial version of your learning. So, if you're talking about a minimal viable product, Your value stream map is the first example of that, where you have the value stream map where you can talk through the process. And even if that is all you have, you can still go to these early adopters, these UAT testers, conduct some training for them, get feedback, and it benefits both the UAT testers or the early adopters, right? Because they're getting some level of training, whereas before they usually get a lot of kind of generic or technical training as opposed to business-specific training. So they benefit, right? And they become better testers. And we benefit and become a better learning team too, because we're getting feedback from those individuals a lot earlier than we would have. And typically those are people from the business. So their feedback is just gold, right? Because they're working every day on the business.
Great answer, Scott. We are pretty much at time. So with that, I'm going to thank you, Scott, for such a great presentation, and a big thank you to everyone joining us for your time and attention. I do ask that at the end of the session, you take a minute to fill out our survey. We love to get your feedback to make our webinars even better. So we hope you'll join us again for another one of our upcoming webinars. Visit gpstrategies.com to view our future sessions. And I wish everyone today a wonderful and productive rest of your day. Thank you.
This webinar was brought to you by GP Strategies. Together, we help organizations transform through their people. You can access more webinars or download additional resources by visiting the GP Strategies Resource Library. The link is on your screen and in the description.